여기 황무지 내려가면 그걸 하는 사람 얼마나 멘트 다 없어졌어. 아, 그쵸. 아, 오늘 그거 기분이야. 아, 진짜. 여기 우리 특히 어디?
아니요. 나가죠? 내리 길게 안 되고 한 번만
안녕하세요. 사람들이 맨날 늦어요. 이러면 안 되는데. 오늘 대사관에서도 한 분이 오시기로 했고, 대사관, 호주 대사관 굿즈를 다 나눠드린다고 하거든요. 너무 좋은 때 오셨습니다. 그분도 지금 안 오셨는데, 일단 시작을 해야 될 것 같아요. 저희 이제, 젠마 셰프님 영상을 번역해서 자막을 단 영상을 지금 보실 거고, 이걸 보신 다음에 한 8시까지는 질문을 적어주셔서 화이트보드에 붙이시면 8시에 이제 구글 미트로 젠마 셰프 교수님이 접속을 하시면 그때 라이브로 Q&A를 1시간 동안 진행할 예정입니다. 질문 많이 던져주세요. 굉장히 많은 얘기가 나오거든요. 그러니까 슬라이드에서는 글씨가 작아서 안 보이는 것도 되게 많아요. 나중에 NEDC 홈페이지에 가보시면 그 자료들이 다 있는데 그걸 참조하시면 너무 좋을 것 같습니다. 그러니까 굉장히 우리나라는 섭식장애에 대한 시스템이나 뭔가가 아무것도 없는데 너무 많아서 자료가 우리가 참고할 만한 자료들도 굉장히 많고 어떤 전략을 짜서 실행을 한다고 하면 그냥 우리 실행할 테니까 뭐 신경 끄세요 이게 아니라 꼬박꼬박 정기적으로 보고를 해요. 그것도 저도 한국에 있는 저도 접속해서 볼 수 있을 정도로 보고를 하고 보고서를 내고 엄청 성실하게 일들을 하십니다. 되게 놀랐어요. 그래서 되게 저희가 배울 점들이 많고 모델로 삼을 만한 점들이 많은 사례일 것 같습니다. 영상을 볼게요.
Hi, my name's Gemma Sharp. I'm a professor as well as the founding director and member for the International Consortium for Research in Eating Disorders. It's a huge pleasure to be presenting for Korea's Eating Disorder Awareness Week. A huge congratulations to Jeannie and everyone involved at this momentous event. I know it's going to be absolutely amazing and people are going to learn a lot about eating disorders. Just before we jump into it, I just wanted to do something we always do in Australia, and that's acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which we find ourselves and acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging. And greetings from Brisbane. That's where I am right now, and hope you can all come and visit us in Australia someday. So very quickly, I mentioned I'm the founding director of the Consortium for Research in Eating Disorders. We launched CoRe-ED not long ago, only September 2024. But in that time, we've already had over 300 people join us from all over the world, including South Korea, and representing more than 20 other countries across 5 continents. And we're also very lucky to have 16 wonderful international partners to date, including rabbits in submarines. But I suppose what our goal is, given that we have participants who are researchers, clinicians, advocates, people with a lived experience, industry, not-for-profit representatives, anyone with an interest in eating disorders is very welcome to join. Our overall aim is to promote innovations in research by empowering all voices and ultimately creating new therapies for all people experiencing eating disorders. So we really want to push for breakthroughs and cures for eating disorders. You can see across the bottom of every slide, I have our contact details, our web address, our email address, LinkedIn, and X profiles. If you would like to join the Consortium for Research in Eating Disorders, it's completely free of charge. Just scan the QR code and sign up. We would love to have you so you can start making a difference for people with eating disorders and their loved ones all across the world. So today I'm presenting in 2 parts. First up, I'm going to be talking about the eating disorder landscape in Australia. This is a huge topic and I'm very honoured to be speaking on it. I'm not going to be able to do it all justice in the time I have, but you're very welcome to get in contact with me and everything I'm going to be showing you is freely available to download online as well. Please just get in contact. So first up, what's the deal with eating disorders in Australia? Well, we were very lucky to have this report prepared last year called Paying the Price in conjunction with the Butterfly Foundation. And it was able to give us a gauge of what's happening in eating disorders from a socioeconomic perspective. So we know that over 1.1 million Australians are experiencing an eating disorder, and that's a 21% increase since 2012. And just to give you some context, there's only about 27 million people in Australia. So 1.1 million is a huge number of people. And in terms of the total socioeconomic cost to Australia, it's $67 billion. And that's a 36% increase from 2012. So the numbers are going up and the costs are going up. And the vast majority of that cost is in lost productivity. So basically, people with eating disorders experiencing such difficulties that they're not able to work. And so that would mean that they're basically not having a good time in life anyway, but that's really where that cost is coming. In terms of who's experiencing eating disorders, well, women are twice as likely to experience them, but clearly anyone of any gender can experience an eating disorder. And the cost to the health system is $251 million a year in Australia. That is mostly coming from people with anorexia nervosa because they are more likely to access support, but clearly everyone experiencing an eating disorder deserves good quality healthcare. And in terms of age groups, 27% of people experiencing an eating disorder are aged 19 or younger. So it's really impacting our young people here in Australia, but clearly anyone of any age can be experiencing an eating disorder. There are 1,273 deaths from an eating disorder in Australia in 2023. That's more than our national road toll, and Australia has a particularly high road toll. So for eating disorders to exceed that shows that it's a particularly fatal illness. And I think the statistic that really jumps out to me from this entire slide, and I know there's a lot of statistics on there, is that less than 1 in 3 people with an eating disorder seek help, meaning that 2/3 are not getting the help that they deserve. And that's a crying shame. The last thing I will point out on here is that Australia is a very big country. Basically, care is often centered around our capital cities, but not everyone lives in capital cities. So sometimes people have to travel to get support. And according to this report, people are spending an average of $975 just to get treatment. So it's a tricky state of affairs here in Australia. Clearly, eating disorders are a big problem in terms of number of people affected and the cost to the health system and the broader socioeconomic environment. Just a breakdown here, which is still from that same report, which is free to download online. Most people have heard of anorexia and bulimia, but clearly they're not as prevalent as some of the others like binge eating disorder, OSFED, and UFED. And I also want to point out ARFID, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, as being acknowledged in this report. And I expect those numbers to increase over time, more and more people being diagnosed with ARFID and its particular link with neurodivergence. So people who are neurodivergent are more likely to have an eating disorder, but ARFID in particular. So that's, I suppose, a snapshot of the eating disorder landscape here in Australia, which I don't think is too dissimilar to some other countries. So who are the main players when it comes to eating disorder support and advocacy in Australia? Well, this isn't everyone who's doing eating disorder support in Australia, but these are some of the key players. So the Butterfly Foundation, I mentioned earlier, linked with that report. They're our national eating disorder support service. But we also have state-based services who service their local region. So Eating Disorders Queensland, where I'm currently based, a shout out to them. Eating Disorders Victoria, where my team used to be based, a shout out to them as well for the fantastic work they're doing too. Eating Disorders Families Australia, EDFA, they're a group that specifically support parents, carers and loved ones of people experiencing eating disorders. So they do fantastic work as well. And last but not least, ANZ, who particularly support health professionals treating eating disorders. So we have a number of charities and professional groups who are there to support people with eating disorders around Australia. As I said, this isn't everyone, but these are key players. And I'd like to think that the Consortium for Research in Eating Disorders is already making a contribution and will continue to do so in years to come in the Australian landscape and beyond. So how do we support people with eating disorders in Australia? Well, this is a very busy slide, and I'd like to have a big shout out to the National Eating Disorders Collaboration, and I'm going to be showing quite a few of their documents in this presentation. Again, free to download for their amazing work in terms of research, education and support of people with eating disorders and those of us who support them. So as I said, a very busy slide, and I'm not going to go through every single point, but something we're very focused on in Australia is, can we actually prevent the development of eating disorders to lower that 1.1 million number? So this is done at many levels. Can we do this in schools, sporting clubs, with online resources, primary healthcare? How best can we actually prevent eating disorders? But also we're focused on early identification. Are we screening people for eating disorders when they come to primary care, even secondary and tertiary? Are we screening them in schools, sporting clubs? Youth mental health services like Headspace is another place where we should be doing screening of eating disorders. And then that initial response. So once we've detected an eating disorder, are we responding appropriately with the right referrals, the right support? So even before someone reaches treatment, there's all these, I suppose, types of support to make sure that that early experience is as positive as possible. Then we move on to treatment, which is the kind of grey-green color there. So community-based treatment, and this is where I've done the vast majority of my work as a senior clinical psychologist. So delivering evidence-based treatment out in the community. So this will be primary care professionals like general practitioners, but also psychologists and dietitians. I suppose in Australia we do have publicly funded community services, absolutely, but nowhere near enough. And most people will end up seeking private care, private psychology, private dietetics in the community for eating disorder support. But of course, that kind of outpatient support, maybe seeing a psychologist or a dietitian weekly or fortnightly, may not be enough, and people require more intensive treatment at various points. So this might be a day program where they go every day for support with meals as well as accessing therapy groups. So that's kind of that community-based intensive treatment. And then, of course, hospital treatment when someone is requiring more acute care. So this might be to medically stabilize them. They might be malnourished, or it might be to psychiatrically stabilize them. Potentially they're at risk of harm to themselves. So this might include inpatient units, some of which are specialized for eating disorders, but some are more general, and also hospital in the home, so care teams going out to people's homes after they've been an inpatient is also an option in some places. But that is the, I suppose, most intensive form of treatment and is generally sort of shorter in duration. And then people will go back to stepping down to community-based treatments. And then, of course, ideally, people are reaching a point of recovery where our job is to maintain that recovery and prevent relapse. So that's a real whistle-stop tour of the step care that we have here in Australia. It very much depends on where you live as to whether you have access to all of this, but ideally, everyone in Australia could access these types of step care. That would be the ultimate goal. In the last sort of 5 to 10 years, we've had some really great initiatives come through eating disorder care in Australia, and I'm going to cover just a couple of them. And as I said, they're all freely available to download, or you can get in contact with me for more information. So the first was the introduction of eating disorder plans, and this happened in late 2019. And again, I acknowledge the National Eating Disorders Collaboration for this screenshot that I have here. So in terms of where these eating disorder plans come into place for that step care model, this is that community-based treatment or outpatient. So until we had eating disorder plans, people were generally entitled to 10 government-funded sessions with a mental health professional for an eating disorder per year and 5 sessions with a dietitian. And as we all know, that's nowhere near what the recommendations are for evidence-based care for eating disorders. So in 2019, the government, after much advocacy, made the bold decision to introduce these government-funded eating disorder plans, which allows people with eating disorders to access 40 sessions with a mental health professional and 20 sessions with a dietitian per year. So many times over what they used to be able to access. And I'll come back to how these plans have gone later in this presentation. But really, this was an absolute game changer that we were able to, I suppose, really give the duration of care that we wanted to give people who are experiencing eating disorders and knowing that they would get that government subsidy. I will say that often the government subsidy doesn't cover all the costs. Sometimes there is out-of-pocket costs to see a psychologist or a dietitian under these plans, but at least the session number of partially supported sessions was increased, and having this every 12 months to renew. Something else, and again, this is 2019 as well, clearly a busy year for our government and eating disorders. And I should say this was the former government, not our current government in Australia, was the funding of a residential eating disorder treatment centre in, I think, almost every capital city in Australia. And residential eating disorder facilities are kind of a lovely in-between mix. So they're not inpatient, the person isn't so acute, but they're not going home at night. So it's not a day program either. They're living there, they're getting support with their eating, they're getting support from a range of different health professionals in a very, very supportive environment. So even though it's now 2025, not all of these centres have been built yet, but happy to say that our one in Queensland has been running for quite some time. The one in Canberra has opened, which is terrific. I know the one in Melbourne is set to open later this year in 2025, but these will also be very, very important for people to be able to seek that more intensive eating disorder support that isn't quite so acute. So again, another great initiative there. And last but not least is our National Eating Disorder Strategy 2023 to 2033, so a 10-year plan. I was lucky enough to be part of the working groups for these strategies, but basically saying, hey, how do we improve eating disorder research, care, advocacy support such that by 2033, we really have people supported much better with eating disorders in Australia. It goes all the way from that prevention part of the step care model through to treatment, recovery, etc. The QR code is on the slide there because there's no way I could cover off on all the recommendations in this strategy, but it's a fantastic document, and I think probably the most exciting thing I've found about it is that I think sometimes with these documents we produce them, we say this is our wish list for eating disorders, but the NEDC are very committed to actually implementing these changes, and that's exactly what's going on at the moment. I recommend you scan the QR code and have a look at this document and sign up for the implementation update so you can see how it's actually happening around Australia with all key stakeholders involved. So politicians, people with a lived experience, clinicians, advocates, researchers, etc. Everyone took part in the development of this strategy, and everyone has a huge role to play in the implementation of it. I'm very excited to see a lot of suggestions about research in this strategy, and as the founding director of the Consortium for Research in Eating Disorders, we're incredibly supportive of this strategy and its implementation, of course. So how's everything going in Australia? Well, again, I'm not going to cover absolutely everything, but something that is quite timely is in late 2024, the evaluation of those eating disorder plans I mentioned, with the 40 sessions with a mental health professional and 20 sessions with a dietitian per year, were evaluated. And I'm sorry that the writing on this slide is quite small. Again, you can download this document, freely download it from the internet. So I think there's definitely wins from these eating disorder plans. It has changed the landscape of care for people with eating disorders across Australia. But we'll have a quick look at the enablers and barriers with these plans. So sometimes people had a really good first engagement with their primary care professional or GP to access these plans. They were able to access evidence-based treatment and particularly dietetic support that they may have not been able to get before. And I suppose their progress through it was monitored. In terms of barriers, though, there were quite a few identified, and I, as a clinician in this space, I certainly identified with these myself. So sometimes the GP wasn't able to really engage with these eating disorder plans. They took too much time, or they weren't really aware of them, at least initially. Certainly, these eating disorder plans were not accessible to everyone. Those with a lower socioeconomic status, younger people, and those living in rural and remote areas were less likely to access them. Some large out-of-pocket expenses, as I mentioned earlier. So the government subsidy pays for some of it, but there's quite a lot that people will have to pay themselves, especially if you're talking 40 psychologist sessions and 20 dietetic sessions. That's actually a lot of money over the course of a year. Sometimes people couldn't find an eating disorder specialist in this field to actually go get the treatment anyway. And then in terms of the review steps, sometimes, again, hard to access the people to the health professionals to get the reviews done. The reviews were done every 10 sessions out of those 40, so that's actually quite regular. So I suppose there's quite a few layers of bureaucracy around these plans. So while there have absolutely been game changers, there's still work to be done. And I think that's the message I want to give here as well, that while Australia is doing a great job of supporting people with eating disorders, we do not have all the answers, and there's still plenty of room for improvement to really support people with eating disorders in Australia. So just a quick summary of part 1 of this presentation. So eating disorders are a major issue in Australia. Over 1.1 million Australians experiencing an eating disorder, and that number seems to keep growing. Treatment is available in that step care approach that I outlined, so in a variety of settings, whether it's more lower intensity as an outpatient, maybe accessing an eating disorder plan, or as an inpatient for more acute presentations. And we've had some really important initiatives over the last 5 to 10 years, particularly our National Eating Disorder Strategy. Again, I encourage you all to access it and have a read of it. There's clearly still more work to be done. Things are going okay, but they could be going even better. I really, again, bring you back to that statistic of only 1 in 3 people actually getting support. We need to make that 3 out of 3 in Australia. So thank you for listening to my whistle-stop tour of my very quick tour of eating disorder landscape in Australia. And now very quickly on to part 2. I am going to stop sharing and change the slide deck, and then we'll resume. So now for part 2 of this presentation, wearing a slightly different hat this time, me as a professor at University of Queensland, where I'm lucky enough to head body image and eating disorders research. I'm going to be talking about digital support in eating disorders, in particular some world first initiatives our group has done out of Australia and how they've related to the eating disorder landscape within Australia. You'll see my contact details on the bottom of every slide. You're very welcome to get in contact with me about this part of the presentation too. So by way of very brief background, there's clearly never going to be enough trained health professionals for the demands for the number of people seeking eating disorder support, over 1.1 million in Australia, particularly if we want to get that 3 out of 3 seeking support. So I started this work back in 2018, so almost 7 years ago. And back then, thinking of using artificial intelligence, particularly conversational AI, to potentially fill gaps in eating disorder service provision was considered quite novel and revolutionary. This is well before ChatGPT was the thing. But I thought, hey, let's give it a try. I'd seen some colleagues use it in some other areas of health and thought it could be adapted for eating disorders. But one thing I knew that I needed to do from the get-go was to make sure we used an extensive co-design process. So involving input from people with a lived eating disorder experience, whether it be themselves or a parent, carer, supporter, as well as health professionals. Because we know that when you involve that lived experience voice, the product at the end is just so much better and more likely to be used. And again, back in 2018, that was considered fairly revolutionary. But I'm very grateful to say that now in 2025, that is very much standard, and people with a lived experience are involved in it all the way along eating disorder care, whether as support workers, clinicians, etc. So I'm so thrilled that we involve them in our research from the earliest stages. So what did we do first? Well, this idea actually started in 2018, but it wasn't launched till 2020, was a very simple conversational AI agent called Kit, our very first chatbot, and we thought, let's go with something a bit simpler. Let's see if we can use Kit in that prevention space of step care. Can it be that really basic education as to what an eating disorder is, the different types, what to look out for, how to have conversations with people, and how to reach out for support if you need it? So that's what Kit was, a very simple rule-based chatbot with all pre-programmed answers. And Kit was hosted on the Butterfly Foundation's website from November 2020. And if we cast our mind back to what was going on in November 2020, That's right, the COVID-19 pandemic. And we were going through a lot of lockdowns here in Australia, and people's mental health was not going very well at all, particularly people seeking support for eating disorders. And the Butterfly Foundation helpline services were completely oversubscribed. So our little chatbot there, Kit, doing some really basic conversation, managed to help shoulder the load during a really difficult time. And helped support over 20,000 people in 12 months, which is a huge number. And owing to this early success with conversational AI, we continued on with our eating disorder work using AI as a support. And that's how we came up with GEM. And yes, that is a play on my name. That's why it's called GEM, from my name, Gemma. And even wearing the same glasses as me, as you'll notice. So GEM's quite a bit of an upgrade on Kit, still that prevention conversation. So doing that early education, helping people seek out support, etc. But better conversational abilities and just a better look and feel. So we've had GEM running in Australia since 2022, and excited to say that GEM also travelled to North America and is now being hosted by our wonderful collaborators in Canada through the National Eating Disorder Information Centre. And again, GEM's results are looking fantastic in both Australia and North America. And I think GEM has really benefited from the collaboration with NEDIC, particularly in terms of content supporting people who are culturally and linguistically diverse. And I think just sort of the look and feel of GEM has improved a lot as well. So really fantastic to see GEM's reach there, helping prevent eating disorders in Australia, North America, and beyond with just a simple conversation. You'll notice that we spent a lot of time in prevention, but how about intervention? Can we use conversational AI to actually support people who are in that treatment space? Well, that's where EDSE came from, which stands for Eating Disorder Electronic Single Session Intervention. You'll notice that all of our characters have kind of a family vibe, and that's intentional. So what EDSE does is it gives a 30-minute conversation while people are waiting for eating disorder treatment, because we saw those eating disorder wait lists really blow out during the COVID-19 pandemic. And if you leave people on wait lists when they're really wanting support, they tend to either not get better or get even worse, unfortunately. And often when treatment does become available, they don't take it up. So you really need to get people support when they really want it. And that's really the idea of EDSE. So this is what EDSE looks like. So again, you have that conversation, that chat going on in the bottom right-hand corner of this picture. And in the background, it's basically a progress dashboard for working through the 30-minute single session there. I'm very proud to say that we finished the randomized control trial for ESE in clinics all around Australia at the end of 2024, and the results were absolutely fantastic. We couldn't have asked for better. So this chatbot is promoting early treatment gains, encouraging people to start treatment, giving them, I suppose, that support they need when they want it. So we'll be making EDSE more widely available in Australia shortly, as well as hopefully internationally. This version of SE is for people aged 16 and over. It's very much a cognitive behavioral therapy enhanced CBTE approach, so that's generally suitable for more adults. But we've just started work on an EDSE version for young people and parents and carers. So watch this space to see an SE version for them. We're very excited to be doing that work too. Finally, this work is in progress, but builds on everything we've been doing, is a more personalised agent in eating disorders. And I'll tell you what we have been up to, but I hope I might be able to come back to a CoRe-ED in the future and give an update. So Basically, this is a mobile app which uses some sensing technology to be, I suppose, detect from the mobile phone users' behaviors when they might be experiencing distress, and then providing a chat conversation when they notice when the app notices that distress. So this is what we call just-in-time adaptive interventions. So this chat is, I suppose, the most advanced version of conversation we have, and it builds on all the learnings from KIT, GEM, and ED-SE. I'm very proud to say that we have a perfect safety record in our team with all of our AI tools, and long may that reign. We're very hot on privacy, safety, and making sure that people feel comfortable with this AI technology. So hopefully with this app, we can give people support, personalized support, exactly when they need it. So this has been a very quick summary of our world first eating disorder initiatives, which have been available in Australia for a number of years and are now traveling internationally, which is fantastic. It's great to see the success and that we're helping people when they might not be able to access help from a health professional straight away. As I mentioned, co-design is absolutely crucial. It just makes sure that that voice in that conversation is realistic and empathetic and all the tone that people want from a health professional. There's clearly opportunities for more advanced AI as we're sort of working on right now, and personalized medicine. And I hope to see more of this in the future from our team and other researchers around the world. So that's it from me. Thank you so much for listening to both parts of this presentation. I hope you have a fantastic Eating Disorders Awareness Week there in South Korea. The QR code is just a reminder to please feel free to join our International Consortium for Research in Eating Disorders for free. You get access to the portal for free and all of our events and initiatives for free. You'll be contributing to much needed research in eating disorders so we can push for better care and treatment around the world, not just in Australia, also in Korea and beyond. We want everyone around the world who's experiencing an eating disorder to get the care they deserve. Thank you again, and all good wishes moving forward. My name's Gemma Sharp. I'm a professor as well as the founding director and member for the
Yeah, hi, Jenna.
Hello.
Hi, we just finished watching your video, so we're taking about 12 minutes to collect questions from the floor.
Sure.
So give us just a couple of minutes.
Yeah, no, so we'll start in 12 minutes, you think?
Yeah, we'll start at 9 your time, which will be 8 here.
Oh,
yeah.
No worry. Did you see I changed my background? I'm now
Yes. Very fitting, very adequate.
I still don't know how I had the other background. Yes, absolutely. I'll hang on. I'll be here.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I'll mute myself.
Right. Okay. Cool.
아직도 있을 거예요.
질문 먼저 드렸었어요. 젠말 교수님한테. 그 발표에서 저는 제일 궁금했던 게, 그, 리뷰, 그 EDP 리뷰에서 GP가 일반 기업의가 EDP를 수행하는 데 따르는 어려움, 이게 왜 생기는지 궁금하다고 그랬더니, 모든 환자들이 맨 처음에 그 GP한테 진료를 받고 GP가 판단을 해서 리퍼럴을 해야지 정신건강 전문가하고 40회 그걸 한다는 거예요. 근데 그런 EDP라는 게 있는지 모르는 GP들도 많고 막 이래서 그런 부분들이 아직 미진하다고 합니다. 질문 더 안 붙여주세요. 붙여주세요. 8시 되기 전에. 영상 앞에 못 보신 분은 저희 유튜브에 영상 다 올라가는 거 아시죠? 거기서 보시면 됩니다.
Hi, can you hear us?
I can.
Yep. Great. So we'll start going. So just like we mentioned earlier, when we are speaking in Korean, we'll mute ourselves. So just bear with us.
All good.
질문 읽어드릴게요. 재단 당사자 단체 연구 집단의 활동에 대해 호주 정부가 개방적이라는 인상을 받았습니다. 한국은 상당히 의료계나 정부가 닫힌 태도를 보이는데 이 차이의 원인은 무엇이라고 생각하시나요? 다음 것도 달까요? 그리고 또 전국적인 실태조사 등에서 호주 정부가 수행하는 역할은 무엇인가요? 주요 액터로서 주로 재단 당사자 단체 연구 집단을 언급해 주셨는데 이 단체들과 호주 정부의 관계는 어떠한가요?
So the first question that we got was a question about the Australian government's support for eating disorder plan in Australia. So the question was, we were all impressed, I think, how open the Australian government is in trying to help and support people with eating disorders, and that is quite on the contrary with the situation here in Korea. I think the Korean government doesn't really prioritize eating disorder as an important issue and has quite a closed approach. So the big bulk of the question is, what do you think the biggest difference is? And the follow-up question was, what is the specific role that the Australian government has in the national surveys?
Sure. Thank you for the question, and it's a real pleasure to be here as well. Gosh, what big questions and what great questions as well. I think eating disorders weren't always on the Australian government radar, so it's not, I don't mean to present it like eating disorders have always been a priority, but I think what happened was, and of course none of us know exactly the mechanisms, but I think quite a few powerful people who had money were able to approach the government, and they themselves had a relative or someone they loved who had an eating disorder. And it was these sort of powerful people who appealed to the politicians, who they themselves had probably relatives who had eating disorders, and it was that shared experience, I think, that started to get eating disorders on the radar a bit more. And also, I think what happened was I presented the results from the 2024 Australian report. There was a 2012 report, so 12 years difference between those two reports. And that 2012 report was very important to show the cost of eating disorders in Australia. So I think people sometimes think that these illnesses aren't costly, but when you actually do that socioeconomic evaluation, the government realized it was better to treat. It was actually a better economic investment in treatment than to not treat. And sometimes those socioeconomic evaluations are very powerful. And the fact that we've had another one in 2024 that's shown, unfortunately, that eating disorders are getting more prevalent in Australia suggests ongoing investment is definitely needed.
Thank you. 우선
질문에 대해서 두 파트로 나눌 수 있을 것 같고요. 그래서 첫 번째 이제 질문이 이제 한국은 굉장히 닫힌 태도가 있는데 이제 호주는 어떻게 이렇게 했냐에 대해서, 호주도 사실 처음부터 이렇게 오픈되어 있는 이제 어프로치는 아니었다고 합니다. 그래서 호주에서는 근데 지난 한 몇 년 동안에 영향력 있고 좀 돈이 이제 많은 분들이 이제 정부에게 이제 어프로치를 했고, 그런 영향력 있는 사람들이 대부분 이제 자기 가족 중에 한 명이 섭식장애를 알았거나 하는 경우가 있어서 그 사람들이 이제 하이어 레벨에서 영향을 좀 많이 줬다고 말씀해 주셨고요. 그리고 이제 그 호주 정부가 수행한 역할에 대해서 이제 말씀을 드리면, 사실 이제 호주도 지금 섭식장애에 대한 리포트가 이제 두 번이 나왔대요. 그래서 2012년에 한 번 나왔었고 2024년에 나왔었고, 그 12년 동안에 이제 어떤 큰 갭이 있어서 이것도 이렇게 시민도 갭이 있었는데 여기서 제일 중요한 포인트는 호주 정부 측에서도 협색장애를 치료하지 않았을 때 경제적 손실이 크다는 거를 알게 되었다고 합니다. 그래서 이 사람들이 병원에 가고 아프면 그만큼 이제 일을 하지 못하고 생산성이 떨어지기 때문에 차라리 이제 협색장애를 앓는 사람들을 이제 치료를 하는 거가 어쩌면 이제 나중에 치료하지 않는 것보다 더 경제적 이득이 있어서 정부 차원에서도 그런 부분에 있어서 조금 더 어떻게 적극적으로 도움을 줄 수 있었다고 답변을 주셨습니다.
보면 아까 그 paying the price라는 리포트가 나왔었잖아요. 그게 2024년 버전이고 12년에 한 번 더 그게 나왔었어요. 그 전에 먼저 나왔었어요. 근데 정말로 이코노믹 버든에 대한 연구 조사가 되게 중요하다는 점을 깨닫게 해주는 것 같습니다.
So the next question we have was in terms of the specific treatment programs for eating disorders in the psychology. Sorry, another follow-up question. So you mentioned there's certain actors in these active people of influence and in power with these organizations. What are the connections between these organizations with the Australian government?
Forgive my laughter. I'm not 100% sure everything that happens, but I suppose I think say some of those bigger groups that I talked about, like Butterfly Foundation, Eating Disorders Victoria, what happens is their sort of board of executives are generally people of influence, maybe in like financial sector, other places like that, and they tend to have links with the politicians. So I think it's the board of directors of these organisations like Butterfly Foundation, Eating Disorders Victoria, Eating Disorders Queensland, who are powerful people of influence, of money, and that helps them liaise with the government. And I, as I said, I don't know all the conversations that take place, but it certainly helps to have a powerful board for your charity to really make progress.
잘 모른다고는 하셨는데 대부분 이 사진에 이제 있는 분들이 뭐 금융업에 종사를 하거나 아니면 좀 영향력 있는 분들이 많아서 이분들이 아마 이제 아까 이제 언급되었던 뭐 버터플라이 재단이라던가 아니면은 이팅 디소드 빅토리아 폭망하기 때문에 예, 아마 그렇게 호주 정부랑 연관이 있는 것 같다고 말씀.
네, NEDC가 처음 만들어졌을 때도 중간에 계약을 NEDC가 그 호주 정부랑 직접 한 게 아니라 버터플라이 재단이 꼈거든요. 그러니까 굉장히 밀접하다고 보시면 돼요. 버터플라이 재단은 되게 역사가 오래됐고 섭식장애를 알았던 딸을 둔 어머니가 만든 재단인데 굉장히 많은 일을 해왔던 것 같습니다. 질문 읽어드릴게요. 호주 프로그램 구성, 섭식장애 발병 원인, 프로그램 개발에서 가장 중요하게 다루는 것, 가장 효과적인 치료 방법 방식이라고 했는데 이거 질문하신 분이 누구신가요? 설명을 좀 들어야 될 것 같아요.
실제로 환자들한테 증상이 호전될 수 있도록 어떤 것을 이야기해주고 어떤 것을 조금 유도하고 어떻게 행동하도록 그렇게 이끌어내는지가 좀 궁금하거든요. 실제로 정말 치료 현장에서 네, 그게 조금 궁금한 거예요.
So the next question was a bit more specific about the program in which that takes place, perhaps in the psychologist's office when they treat eating disorders. In Australia, when they think of the eating disorder plan and how it's been in place, what is the most important part in that treatment, and what has been the most effective treatment?
Yeah, I mean, great question. And I think with the evaluation, they weren't necessarily able to tease apart the particular treatment modalities, but certainly within an eating disorder plan, there's only certain types of treatment that are meant to be employed. So the most common is CBT, as I talked about in my presentation. But there's also interpersonal psychotherapy, sort of focal dynamics, so more of a psychodynamic approach. They're all approved. And I suppose from my own experience, what happens in 40 sessions is that sometimes you'll use elements of lots of different treatments because it's based on the person's needs and presentation at the time. So CBT might be good as a starting point, but potentially you might use some other elements of treatment. So I think there's no one answer. And I think those of us in eating disorders and psychologists, we know to be versatile because that's what's required. And not everyone is going to respond to CBTE. So it's good that the plans have options for psychologists to choose different approaches. So I don't know from the evaluation, though, I don't think they were able to say what was the best.
Another question, I think follow-up was you just mentioned about the 40 sessions. Was there a reason why the 40 sessions? 40 sessions?
Yeah, so that I remember actually being part of those discussions as a very junior psychologist, and a lot of these numbers are just whatever the government thinks of at the time, so they're not always based in research. But with the 40-session model, that does come from a CBTE approach, and particularly if someone is coming from an underweight category, 40 sessions is recommended to get that weight restoration and then more therapy after that. So that's where that 40 sessions came from. And believe me, we were very grateful for the 40.
이제 아까 나왔던 질문, 이제 주셨던 질문이 왜 어떤 이제 프로그램을 구성을 하고 있고 뭐를 중요하게 생각하는지였고요. 그 다음에 제가 팔로우업으로는 왜 40회를 기준으로 했는지도 같이 여쭤봤습니다. 그래서 첫 번째 질문에 대한 답변은 본인이 이제 사실 그때마다 다르다고 하시던 것 같아요. 버스틸리타라고 해서 다각면으로 치료하는 게 중요하다고 했고, 그 근간에는 이제 CBT라고 이제 아시겠지만 인지행동 치료법이 있다고 말씀해 주셨습니다. 그래서 인지행동 치료법을 기준으로 하고 그 외 뭐 인터퍼스널 사이코테라피라든지 뭐 포컬 다이내믹, 사이코다이내믹 같은 다양한 심리학적 어프로치를 한다고 했었고요. 이제 제마 샤프 교수님께서는 CBT는 좋은 시작 포인트지만 우리가 하나의 이제 치료원의 답이 있는 건 아니다라고 말씀해 주셨습니다. 그래서 주로 호주에서는 40회를 기준으로 하고 아마 그게 급여가 되는 이제 기준점으로 알고 있어요. 근데 40회를 한 거는 사실 그거를 정했을 때 당시에 정부에서 정한 넘버라서 뭐라고 이제 뭐 이렇게 어떤 이유가 있는 건 아니지만 특히 이제 협회장에서는 특히나 만약에 저체중인 환자가 온다면 그 저체중을 정상 체중을 올리는 거를 40세션 동안 목표로 한다고 합니다. 그래서 그 기간이면 충분하다고 생각된다고 하셨고, 그리고 그 이후에 이제 다른 여러 가지 치료를 진행한다고 좀 정리를 해주신 것 같습니다.
치료에 대해서 말씀 좀 드리면 사람마다 다를 거예요. 다 다를 거고, 보통 CBT-E라고 하잖아요. CBT Expanded라고 하는데 이게 좀 조사도 많이 되고 연구도 많이 되긴 해요. 근데 우리나라는 좀 특히 CBT에 대해서 별로 인식이 별로 안 좋죠. 너무 냉정하다고 생각을 하니까요. 근데 CBT-E에 대해서 좀 더 들어보시고 싶으신 분들은 이탈리아 세션 오시면 됩니다. 거기에 세계 CBT-E 권위자인 리카르도 달레 그라베 박사님이 발표를 해주시기 때문에 이거는 정말 듣기가 들을 기회가 별로 없는 기회이기 때문에 이탈리아에서 저는 꼭 오시면 들으실 수 있으실 겁니다. 자, 다음 질문은 섭식장애는 재발률이 높은 질병으로 알고 있는데 치료받은 사람들의 회복률, 재발률은 어떠한가요? 입니다.
So as we can see, we have some sticky notes in the back. That's the questions.
I can
So reading them
see
out.
a lot of them. That's
Yeah,
great.
that's quite a lot. So the next question we had was, we know that eating disorder has a quite high rate of relapse among patients, and it's a very difficult disease to be treated. So what's the prevalence rate in terms of, I'd say, overcoming the disorder and also the relapse rate in Australia?
Yeah, and I think, gosh, there's so many different figures there depending on what research you look at. I mean, I've seen relapse rates over 50% in Australia, but some as low as 20 to 30%. And I think because sometimes when we do these studies, we sort of combine everyone, and I think potentially some disorders are more prone to relapse than others. I think I've been very lucky to do research more recently in midlife populations, and we're seeing eating disorder prevalence around sort of 3 to 5% for women, for particularly women in midlife, and that's not that much lower than teenagers. So we can see that these eating disorders are persisting throughout people's lives. So I think the relapse rate is unfortunately quite high, but I mean over 50% in some studies.
이제 재발률, 회복률에서 말씀 주셨는데 재발률에 대한 연구는 어떤 연구를 보느냐에 따라서 다르다고 말씀해 주셨고 이제 다 너무 잘 아시겠지만 굉장히 재발률이 높은 질병이잖아요. 그래서 교수님 말씀하기로는 어떤 연구들을 보면 거의 50% 가까이가 결국 재발을 한다. 본인이 지금 이제 진행하고 있는 이제 최근 연구는 이제 중년 여성에서의 이제 섭식 장애를 이제 보시는 그런 그 연구를 하고 계신다고 해요. 그래서 그 퍼센테이지가 전체 중세 여성 환자 중에서 죄송해요. 중년 여성들 중에서 3%에서 5% 가까이로 말씀해 주셨고 그 퍼센테이지가 사실 청소년기에 나타나는 퍼센테이지와 크게 다르지 않다고 말씀을 하셔서 이 식이장애라는 질병은 이제 생애 주기에 따라서 뭐 이렇게 감소되는 게 아니라 계속 지속적으로 나타나는 걸 알 수 있다라고 말씀해 주셨습니다.
섭식장애를 앓는 사람들이 보통 몇 년을 앓았냐고 물어보면 1N년, 10년 넘는 경우가 다반사잖아요. 그래서 조사를 해보면 처음에는 정말 안 낫는다 이렇게 생각을 하는데 그 팔로우업을 길게 잡잖아요. 그러면 낫는 거예요. 네, 오래 가긴 하지만 나을 수 있다는 거를 말씀드리고 싶습니다. 다음 질문 읽어드릴게요. 네. 한국처럼 지원이 전무한 나라에서 개인이 할 수 있는 노력은 무엇일까요? 모르실 것 같아요. 구체적으로 왜곡되지 않은 신체성을 가지고 음식과의 관계를 건강하게 하는 법은 무엇일까요? 그러니까 지원이 없을 때 스스로 그냥 건강하게 살 수 있는 방법은 무엇일까요? 아니면 개인의 노력으로 이게 가능한 문제일까요? 라고 물어보셨습니다.
This question, I think, resonates with a lot of us, especially in Korea. Going back to the first point, how we were all very surprised and shocked and inspired how well Australia is developed in terms of eating disorder treatment compared to Korea, which really doesn't have much. So the next question talks about in countries like Korea where the access to resources are quite limited and it is quite deprioritized in the healthcare system, what ways can individuals approach to treat it? So for example, what's a good way that we can have a healthy relationship with food and to overcome body dysmorphia? And do you think these issues are something that individuals can try to overcome on themselves?
Gosh, yeah, I completely appreciate the differences in the healthcare systems. And I know that sometimes people will travel to other countries to get the support that they need, and that's not easy to do. It's not always easy to access from different countries. I suppose I'm just thinking of some folks I know in Ireland who went to England to get care because it was better in England. I think it's a really tough ask for an individual, isn't it, to sort of to solve all their own problems. And I honestly think that's why we developed the consortium, because we knew that we had all these resources in Australia, and potentially it's just even doing some basic education with health professionals such that they are better at detecting and doing that early intervention. I mean, even the sort of the chatbots we talked about, we want to translate them and make those tools more broadly available outside of just English-speaking countries. So I honestly think, I don't want to put too much pressure on the individual to solve a problem that's very, very difficult. I think it's about sharing resources and knowledge with countries that do have it, and that's my passion for starting the consortium, and connecting with Jeannie, that I think it's about system change more than individual change. And I mean, obviously, I know a bit about K-pop and appearance ideals in Korea, and they sound extremely difficult to achieve. Just so skinny, just needing to be tall but skinny, and just I think sort of the culture in Korea makes it very, very challenging for people to necessarily have a good relationship with food in their bodies when you're always being told to look a certain way and eat less, and to be successful. So I mean, we do have our sort of more body positive movements that are a bit more common in Western society, but I'm not sure I'm seeing them take off as much in Korea. I think it would, I suppose, need more influencers to promote that.
우선 이제 주셨던 질문의 답은 사실 이제 두 파트로 나눌 것 같은데, 당연히 이제 보건제도의 차이가 있기 때문에 본인도 뭐 어떤 환자분 같은 경우는 옛날에 아일랜드에서 영국 가서 치료받을 정도로 정말 심각하면 이제 다른 나라로 사람들이 이제 간다고도 합니다. 근데 이제 전반적으로 이러한 이제 우리가 이제 겪고 있는 문제들을 한 개인이 다 해결하는 거는 좀 무리가 있을 것 같다고 말씀을 해주셨고요. 그래서 그렇기 때문에 이 제마 교수님도 본인 이런 컨소시엄을 시작을 하시게 된 계기라고 말씀해 주셨고, 이 컨소시엄을 시작을 하면서 또 좀 변화를 이제 가지고 왔던 거는 호주 내에서도 이제 의사들에게, 그러니까 이제 호주 같은 경우는 아시겠지만 그 이제 가정의학과를 먼저 방문하고 그다음에 전문의한테 가는 시스템이거든요. 그래서 무조건 가정의한테 먼저 가야 돼요. 그래서 가정의학과인 선생한테 가서 이제 질병을 이제 진단을 받고 그다음에 전문의한테 연결해 주는 리퍼럴 시스템인데, 그런 이제 GP들이라고 하던데 그 가정의학과 전문의들에게 조금 이 섭식장애 대한 질병을 좀 교육을 시키고 알리면서 더 잘 그 디텍션 되고 할 수 있도록 조금 교육을 했다고 합니다. 그리고 추가로 이제 결국엔 사실 어제 수잔나 폭스 교수님하고 좀 세션이 이해가 많이 이제 관통하는 것 같은데, 결국에는 우리가 알고 있는 정보와 이제 그 자원을 서로 공유를 해야 된다고 말씀해 주셨어요. 그래서 아까 이제 뒷부분에 그런 디지털 헬스 치료나 AI 관련도 말씀해 주셨는데, 그런 것들을 이제 앞으로도 뭐 영어가 아닌 이제 뭐 한국어라든지 다른 언어로 번역하는 것도 중요한 게 되겠고, 그래서 우리가 이제 이러한 노력을 하다 보면 결국 한 개인이 이제 변화를 갖고 오는 게 아니라 제도적으로 변화를 갖고 와야 된다고 말씀해 주셨고, 그러면서 이제 본인도 K-팝이나 이제 그런 한국 문화를 조금 안다라고 말씀해 주셨어요. 굉장히 우리가 외모 지상주의적인 그런 문화를 또 문화권이기도 하고, 한 개인에게 뭐 말라야 되면서 뭐 키도 커야 되고 성공해야 되고 여러 가지를 굉장히 이제 요구하는 사회라는 걸 잘 아시기 때문에, 이러한 환경에서는 한 개인이 이제 음식과의 좋은 관계를 맺는다든지 아니면은 이제 이렇게 치료를 한다든지 좀 어려울 수 있을 것 같다. 근데 다만 이제 그 서구권에서는 아마 아실 수도 있는데 한 몇 년 전부터 바디 포지티비티라고 해서 본인의 이제 몸을 이렇게 긍정화하는 그런 이제 사회적 어떤 현상이 일어났었는데 그런 것들을 우리가 좀 서구권에서 배울 수 있고 한국에도 차용할 수 있지 않을까라는 걸 좀 말씀해 주셨습니다.
아일랜드에서도 성식장애 치료 시스템이 좀 부재해서 아일랜드 사람들이 영국으로 가서 치료를 받는다는 얘기를 저번에 제마샤 부교수님하고 처음 줌으로 만났을 때 얘기를 했거든요. 그래서 저한테 뭐라고 하셨냐면 일본 가서 치료받을 수 없냐고 하는 거예요. 아니, 아일랜드랑 영국은 영어가 통하지만 일본 안 돼요 라고 했습니다. 바디 파지티브 운동은 우리나라도 있긴 한데 저는 한계가 좀 뚜렷하다고 생각을 해서 네. 다음 질문 읽어드릴게요. 챗봇이 많은 성과를 이루고 있어서 정말 다행이고 감사합니다. 혹시 이 챗봇을 개발하실 때 기술 접근성이 낮은 소외계층은 어떻게 참여 가능케 하고자 했나요? 효과적인 기술을 개발하고자 고민할 때마다 아예 기술에 접근이 어려운 소외계층을 어떻게 배제하지 않을 수 있을지 고민입니다. 라고 하셨습니다.
So the next question is, I think, a question related to the part 2 of your talk. So about the generative AI and chatbots that you mentioned. When you were designing the chatbots for patients with eating disorders, how did you ensure that you were inclusive of people from perhaps low socioeconomic status who would have limited access to resources such as internet, who live in rural areas, probably not well educated, and so on. So,
a really great point, and I think we do our absolute best there to be inclusive, because we know that if we don't include those groups, the chatbot will not be anywhere near as effective. So what we have, and you know, we don't have everyone, but we have sort of big databases of people who've been involved in our research and are willing to keep being involved. I think something probably that is a little bit different in Australia is gender diversity. So we always make sure that we have males, females, gender diverse people, people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. So people who don't have English as first language. And that often covers off on certain areas, but I think we could always include people who need support. Like I don't believe we are doing this perfectly at all, but we do our best. And I think when you sort of release the chatbots, when you do your trials, you're always learning, and the fact that it's like a dynamic system, you can always improve it. So people, I think someone said we had too many emojis in one of our chatbots too. So we're like, okay, well, we'll scale that back a bit. So I think you're always reaching the people you want ultimately, and you take the feedback all the time and keep improving. And you do the best you can in the co-design to include as many people as possible, but you'll never get it perfect.
지금 이제 만드신 챗봇도 아직 완벽하진 않다. 굉장히 이제 앞으로 이제 그 고쳐할 부분이 이제 많다고 말씀해 주셨고, 이거 설계를 하실 때 이제 호주 같은 경우는 이제 뭐 그 성별의 어떤 그 다양성, 그리고 이제 문화적 다양성, 언어적 다양성을 좀 많이 포괄시키려고 했다고 하십니다. 그래서 주로 이제 그러한 인자들이 어떤 이제 지역 간 그 소외계층이 좀 나타나는 시스템인가 봐요. 그래서 뭐 예를 들어 이민자가 많은 지역이라면은 조금 더 이렇게 사회 취약계층이 많고 그런 걸 조금 이제 말씀해 주셨고, 그래서 그런 최대한 이제 다양한 사람들을 이제 각 그 군에서 모으려고 노력을 하고 있고, 대신 이 챗봇이 아직 완벽하진 않지만 가장 큰 장점은 계속 피드백을 받으면서 수정하고 개선할 수가 있어서 그 과정을 거치면서 지금 새로 개선하려고 노력한다고 하셨습니다.
네, 다음 질문은 CBT 이해 같은 경우에 성인 CBT랑 그다음에 아이들과 청소년 사업 CBT가 어떻게 다른지, 그리고 코디자이닝 할 때 청소년의 경우는 어떻게 코디자이닝을 같이 할 수 있을지, 그리고 팬데믹 때 그 챗봇이 큰 역할을 했다고 하는데 이게 소셜 서포트 사회적인 지원 같은 거를 대체할 수 있다고 보는지 아니면 별개라고 보는지 물으셨습니다.
So our next question is a combination, and it's mostly in 3 parts, so bear with me.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, so the first part of this question was, what are the major and important differences approaching CBTE between adults and children/adolescents?
Yep.
And second part is when you could co-design a program for minors, so adolescents and children, were there any barriers and cautions to take compared to adults, especially in the eating disorder programs? And the last bit is going back to the chat bot, so it's from the same person who asked this question, is so for example, during the times in pandemic, do you think that conversational AI can work as a substitute for community-based care, so it's like social support, or do you think it's like a different category of its own?
Yeah, and I'll please just remind me if I'm not answering a part of it. I'll go with the last part and then come back if that's okay. So I think yeah, I mean the fact that the COVID-19 pandemic really pushed along our research, which was helpful. We always saw it as kind of an adjunct to treatment, but that's not to say that some people might like to use that form of chatbot treatment by itself. But most commonly, we've seen it used in addition to that community-based treatment. That seems to be what people like here in Australia. That we call it a blended model. So say even in my own practice, I will still see someone regularly, but the chatbot might be helping them practice skills outside of sessions. So it's kind of a nice supplement. But I mean, I think potentially in the future it will just be purely a digital stream that people will be able to choose, and that's what they want. And other people will still potentially prefer that purely in-person approach, and others will go for the blended. So that's my answer to part 3. Part 1, I think, was about CBTE for children, adolescents versus adults. This is such an interesting area of research that's emerging. So I think, gosh, like particularly, I suppose with our chatbot stuff, we've gone as young as 16 with that CBTE approach, and some people do really well as sort of emerging adults with that style. But there's also a push for that family-based therapy, which is used with children and adolescents, to extend to people in their 20s because maybe they're still at home living with their families. So I think it's very much a case-by-case basis. So say, yeah, a younger person could do very well with CBTE, particularly, I suppose, if they're quite disconnected from their family, maybe they've had a really traumatic time. CBT might be exactly what's right for them, but then, yeah, a sort of someone in their 20s might do really well with a family-based approach because that's the way they're living still in that family unit, and getting support with meals is still appropriate. So I think there's cases for both, really, that you could extend the adolescent version or bring down the adult version. And I think in my experience with our research, we actually haven't had to change the CBTE approach that much. They were very mature teenagers, and they did a great job with it. So, but I expect there'll be a lot more research on that to come. And in Australia, I'm not sure about Korea, but we have this sort of arbitrary cutoff of 18 as adults, and a lot of people who are 18 are still feeling like they're still quite young. So I think it depends on the person. And then the second part, can you just remind me of the second part? Sorry about that.
The second part was also a follow-up question to the adolescent versus adults. So when you're designing the chat box in the generative AI, what were the barriers and questions that you took considering minors would be using the app?
Yeah, a really good point. And I think we spent a lot of time talking with young people as young as 13. It was more the conversational tone and style. I think they they kind of called us old, which was a bit offensive, but we got past it. It was making sure that it was understandable and relatable. So it wasn't that the content needed to change a lot; it was the style and tone, and that's what took more time. And they no surprises, they took to the technology very quickly, whereas their parents were a little bit slower, shall I say. But everyone got there in the end. I honestly think, like, we loved working with young people. They were actually much more realistic about what the technology could offer. It was actually the slightly older folks who had a bit more unrealistic expectations. They were expecting the technology to do a lot more than it was capable of at that point. So I think, we had a great time working with them, and it was really just, tone and style and emojis, that kind of thing.
좀 질문이 길어서 세 파트로 나누게 될 것 같은데, 첫 번째 이제 답변 주셨던 거는 그럼 이 챗봇과 이제 AI가 이 사회복지 프로그램을 대체할 수 있는가에 대한 이제 질문을 답변을 해주셨고, 처음부터 설계를 할 때 대체할 수 있다고 생각하지는 않으셨대요. 그래서 당연히 치료를 이제 진행을 하고 거기 이제 사이드로 가져가는 거라고 이제 말씀을 주셨고, 그리고 또 어떨 때는 이 AI 프로그램도 잘 맞지 않는 사람들도 있어서 좋아하지 않아서 사용하지 않는 환자들도 있다고 합니다. 그래서 본인도 지금 이제 자기 환자들 같은 경우에도 이제 환자들 정기적으로 오랫동안 이제 만났던 환자들한테도 약간 숙제처럼 이 어플을 이제 사용해 보라고 말씀을 해주시고, 이런 거를 이제 그 심리 그쪽에서는 블렌디드 모델이라고 하신다고 하더라고요. 근데 또 미래에는 이제 사람들이 이렇게 본인이 이제 취사 선택을 할 수 있는 날이 오지 않을까. 디지털이 좋으면 디지털만 하고 사람 만나는 게 좀 사람만 만나고 둘 다가 좀 둘 다 하고, 그래서 그렇게 조금 앞으로 변화되지 않을까라고 말씀해 주셨고요. 그 다음에 두 번째 질문, 이제 CBT-E 관련해서 그럼 청소년 또는 어린이와 이제 어른들 간의 어떤 치료의 차이가 있는가에 대해서 말씀을 주셨는데, 사실 이 분야가 지금 굉장히 연구가 많이 진행되고 있는 분야라고 하고 아직 이렇게 정확한 답은 없다고 해요. 그래서 우리가 이제 알기로 청소년들이나 아니면 이제 어린이들은 이제 약간 이제 가족들이랑 같이 이제 겸허해서 이제 치료를 한다고 합니다. 패밀리 베이스 테라피를 진행을 하는데, 사실 뭐 우리나라도 마찬가지지만 20대 중후반 넘어서도 이제 부모님과 같이 살잖아요. 호주도 그런 경우가 있고, 그래서 케바케로 만약에 뭐 나이가 25살이어도 가족과 같이 살고 있고 그 이제 혹시 알고 있는 환자에게 식사를 제공하는 게 이제 부모님이다 하면 이 패밀리 베이스 테라피를 이제 청소년들 하는 것처럼 똑같이 진행을 한다고 하셨습니다. 그리고 또 본인 경험에 의하면은 또 많은 이 섭취장애를 앓고 있는 이제 청소년들이 많이 성숙하다고 해요. 그래서 그 학생들한테도 따로 CBT를 이제 막 청소년으로 바꿔 살 필요는 없다고 말씀해 주셔서 환자에 따라서 다르다고 말씀해 주셨고, 그 비슷한 맥락으로 이제 그러면 이 챗봇을 디자인을 할 때 어떻게 좀 다르게 했는지, 아무래도 이제 미성년자들이 또 이런 그 어플을 이제 액세스를 하는데 어떤 걸 이제 고려했냐고 여쭤봤을 때는 사실 뭐 컨텐츠는 다르지 않았지만 이제 대화 톤이라든지 아니면 스타일, 그 디자인을 좀 많이 신경 썼다고 하셨어요. 그래서 아까 뒷부분에 말씀하신 뭐 이모티콘을 좀 많이 썼다든지 좀 이제 이해를 좀 받을 수 있는, 그리고 또 이렇게 공감할 수 있는 형태의 언어를 이제 사용을 하면서 노력했다고 하셨고, 그리고 이제 또 피드백을 또 많이 구했다고 하십니다. 이 어린 환자들한테. 또 어린 환자들이 또 어른 환자들과는 다르게 이 테크놀로지부터 원하는 게 명확하고 현실적이어서 또 많은 도움이 됐다고 하셨어요. 네.
CBT-E 관련해서도 말씀드리면, 보통 외국에서는 치료 이런 게 되게 잘 되어 있는 외국에서는 어린 환자들에게는 패밀리 베이스드 세라피를 하는데, 이거는 가족 기반 치료라고 하는데 주도권이 부모님한테 있어요, 사실. 그리고 성인이 되면 CBT-E를 하거든요. 이거는 개인의 생각을 고치는 거잖아요. 근데 이게 또 이탈리아 세션에서 발표해 주실 리카르도 달레그라비 박사님이 이거를 연구하셨는데, 그분은 그 레지덴셜 병원을 운영하고 계시는 거예요. 거기서 저희 입장에서는 굉장히 배부른 고민을 하고 계셨는데 뭐냐면 아이들이 패밀리 베이스드 세라피로 치료를 받다가 성인이 되면 18살이 되면 갑자기 CBT-E로 바뀌어진다는 거예요. 그럼 치료자도 바뀌고 갑자기 치료 방식도 바뀌어지고 그래서 아이들부터 받을 수 있는 CBT-E 프로그램을 개발해서 지금 적용 중이라고 하십니다. 그래서 그걸 듣고 싶으시다면 꼭 이탈리아 세션을 신청해서 오셨으면 좋겠습니다. 네, 맞아요. 시간 너무 많이 남았어요. 천천히 해도 돼요.
Yeah. So the next question, sorry. The next question is, I think you kind of answered it previously, but in the age of AI and chat boxes, what's the role of psychologists in the future?
Yeah, and I think some psychologists may say they're worried about their jobs, but I don't feel that way. I think, and as you said, I kind of alluded to it before, but that blended approach is very, very popular. I think what we see is if we just lead people to a digital approach, they will often disengage. They like to know that there's someone there kind of coaching them, cheering them on. And that's the role of the psychologist, I think. Because often when people seek support from psychologists, they are connection seeking. They want that interpersonal relationship. So I think there will be a role for both of us moving forward, the psychologists and the generative AI therapists. And some people will just want to do pure Gen AI therapy, and that's absolutely fine because they're learning from our scripts anyway. So we've provided the conversations from which the Gen AI is learning. But I see us working alongside each other, and I hope there's a lot more of that moving forward. I think potentially people are becoming more open to it. Time goes on. I think there was a lot of hesitancy maybe a couple of years ago, but now, I mean, I just think people don't even realize that they're actually using Gen AI all the time. And when you tell them that they are, they're like, oh, okay, I'm already actually using this. So I think potentially there's more education to be done with patients and psychologists to make people more comfortable with the technology.
네, 그래서 다음 그 질문은 뭐였냐면은 AI 시대에 그럼 심리 상담사들의 역할은 어디에 있느냐, 소멸되지 않느냐 이런 질문을 던져드렸었고, 우선 젬마 교수님은 사실 뭐 많은 사람들이 이미 호주에서도 걱정을 한다고 해요. 이러다가 이제 심리 상담도 엎어지는 거 아니냐, 다 이런 뭐 챗GPT로 대체되는 거 아니라고 하시는데 사실 그렇진 않다고 보셨어요. 그래서 아까 앞에 말했던 이제 심리 상담사와 챗 박스를 같이 이제 겸해서 치료를 하는 블렌디드 어프로치가 유행을 할 것 같다라고 말씀해 주셨고, 사람들이 사실 심리 상담을 받으러 가는 가장 큰 이유가 뭔가 좀 응원을 받고 싶고, 또 이런 사람과 사람 간의 이런 이제 연결을 이제 조금 이제 그런 거를 좀 이렇게 결핍을 느껴서 그런 걸 채우고 싶어서 만나는 거기 때문에 그 역할은 아무리 이 제 나이가 나와도 대체할 수는 없다고 말씀해 주셨고요. 그래서 본인도 이제 앞으로 이제 미래를 이제 보았을 때 막 그런 제나이나 챗박스 같은 거랑 같이 이제 겸하면서 치료를 하고 이제 일을 하실 것 같다고 했고, 또 많은 사람들이 현장에서 이거에 대한 좀 오픈네스를 보인다고 합니다. 그리고 가장 중요한 건 교육적인 입장에서 도움이 많이 될 것 같다고 말씀해 주셨습니다. 그리고 이제 다음 질문을 하려고 하는데요. 이제 다음 질문은 이제 비슷하게 이제 AI 관련 챗봇이고 아까 앞에 조금 나왔던 것 같은데, 섭식장애 환자들을 위한 챗박스를 만들 때 좀 이제 고려한 사항이 다른 거 있다면, 이제 뭐 예를 들어서 뭐 조현병이라든지 뭐 일반 우울증이나 이제 불안장애와는 다르게 조금 특별한 게 있을 것 같은데 그게 뭔지 한번 여쭤보도록 하겠습니다.
So Gemma, I think we're almost towards the end with the last questions.
Thank you for all the great questions.
Yeah. I think you probably have mentioned it, but I think we want to hear more in detail, perhaps, with more psychological knowledge charged. So on the AI intervention and the chatbot that you created called Gem, how was the program designed differently, tailored to specifically for eating disorder patients? Because compared to other mental health disorders such as anxiety and depression, schizophrenia, we think there's a bit of a difference. So what are some psychological considerations that you put in?
Yeah, and great question there. I think so. Sometimes we do some overlap, like anxiety management skills, mood management skills can be used across diagnoses. And I think anyone who supports people with eating disorders will be well versed in helping multiple diagnoses, because often the person does have multiple diagnoses. But I think in what sort of shines through with all of our chatbot work is sort of relationship with food and relationship with the body, which can of course help in other areas. But I think with GEM and EDSE, so there are sort of two chatbots that are out at the moment, a focus on, I suppose, eating regularly, trying to eat a range of foods, not buying into sort of diet culture is a sort of a key part of what we do. And your relationship with your body, I think something that we've shifted to in more recent years, as opposed to body positivity, where just sort of really loving your body all the time, more of a body neutrality approach. So where you don't love your body all the time, but you appreciate its function and what it allows you to do, and some days you'll like it less. So I think, yeah, relationship with food, relationship with the body, and just having a bit more balance, I suppose. And you tend not to see that so much in anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, those types of tools. They'll just probably more talk about eating healthy or something vague like that. So I think that's something our tools do a lot more of, because we know that relationship with food, a relationship with your body is very disrupted in an eating disorder.
So actually, I have a follow-up question from what you mentioned.
Sure.
I guess it's in two parts. One is the design, you said, to making sure you add contents in relationship with body, in relationship with food. But I think if you think about eating disorders at times, those things can be quite a trigger. So I wanted to ask, how do patients respond to triggers in the app, perhaps? And what has been the compliance rate of patients using the chatbot? And then the second part is, once you have enough data from these apps, do you think they will have the power to work for further diagnoses?
Yeah, I'll answer the second part first. Absolutely, yes. So basically, all of our work has been very progressive. So KIT back in 2020 was incredibly basic, but we learned a lot about as you're sort of saying, what type of content people engage well with and what they really avoid because it's too triggering. So like our language models have improved radically because of all the work that we've done. So there's great promise, I think, for AI in diagnostics, prognostication, triaging treatments. So yes, there's a lot more to be done there. And in terms of compliance or engagement, we've actually had quite high engagement. That's not to say, like, because I think even in-person treatment is not super high engagement. So we're sort of always struggling a bit with that, no matter what forum. But I think what we've done is use a sort of friendly, encouraging tone, that people can take breaks when they're using it. They don't have to sort of, use it intensively for half an hour. They can pause and come back. And also the characters I showed in my presentation, the little avatars, they've been quite good as well for engagement, that people are like, oh, it's a cute character, it's a cute image. that can sometimes help offset a bit more challenging content. But we do find that people really want to do that skill work that's quite difficult. That's very popular conversations. So I think probably engagement is higher than people might expect. It's not perfect, but then again, in person is not perfect either. Like we know in Australia, some of our statistics are that some people just come for one session. That's actually very common. They just do one session. So if your chatbot does a good job in one session, that's a win, I think.
네, 우선 이제 마지막 질문 될 것 같긴 한데, 아까 이제 질문을 했던 게 이제 그러면은 섭식장애를 이제 다른 질환, 근데 이제 섭식장애에서는 좀 특징적으로는 이제 환자들에게 이제 질문에 어떤 음식과에 대한 본인의 관계, 그리고 이제 몸에 대한 이제 관계, 이런 질문들이 이제 들어간다고 해요. 그리고 최대한 이제 뭐 음식과의 관계 같은 데 있어서도 그냥 그런 이제 다이어트 문화나 이런 거에 좀 빠지지 않도록 이렇게 대화를 잘 설계를 해서 유도를 해서 이제 질문을 한다고 했었고, 또 요즘 유행하는 또 트렌드인 이 몸과의 어떤 이제 서로 관계를 생각했을 때, 한동안은 아까 이제 말했던 바디 포지티비티라고 해서 무조건 이제 무한 자기 몸에 대한 긍정을 좀 표출했었는데, 요즘은 몸에 대한 좀 중성성을 이렇게 말씀한다고 해요. 그래서 그 의미는 내 몸을 항상 사랑해도 되지 않지만 그래도 항상 감사하는 마음을 갖고 있다. 그런 좀 이렇게 현실적인 몸에 대한 이제 기대를 쓸 수 있는 이제 그런 어프로치를 한다고 하셨어요. 그래서 뭐 불안장애라든지 우울증이라든지 그다음에 이런 이제 시기장애 특징들을 잘 경합을 해서 이런 어플을 디자인했다고 하셨고, 그거에 대한 팔로업 질문으로 제가 드렸던 거는, 사실 섭식장애가 어려운 이유 중에 하나가 뭐 알코올 중독은 그냥 알코올을 안 먹으면 되는 거고, 뭐 마약 중독은 마약을 안 하면 되는데, 섭식장애 음식은 항상 우리 주위에 있는 거잖아요. 그렇기 때문에 항상 트리거가 된다고 생각이 드는데, 그런 환자들이 어플에서 그런 질문을 봤을 때 트리거가 되지 않느냐, 그리고 그런 트리거 때문에 그 어플을 이렇게 인게이지를 잘 안 하고 뭐 그만두는 경우도 있냐, 그런 좀 환자들이 얼만큼 수능을 하는지 수능도 된 질문을 드렸었고, 두 번째는 이거를 설계한 사람 입장에서 이 데이터들을 다 이제 취합을 했을 때 어떤 진단 또는 예후와 관련해서 쓰려고 하는 목적이 있느냐, 좀 두 가지를 여쭤봤습니다. 그래서 첫 번째 이런 트리거와 이제 수능도에 대해서는 생각보다 수능도가 높다고 하셨어요. 근데 그 이유는 이제 아까도 막 귀엽게 막 안경 쓴 캐릭터도 있고, 이제 그런 귀여운 캐릭터 때문에 어쩌면 그런 무거운 질문을 좀 가볍게라도 이렇게 그런 이제 무드를 세팅하려고 해서 많이 사람들이 좋아하는 것 같다고 하셨고, 그리고 또 의외로 환자들이 굉장히 노력을 많이 한다고 해요. 그런 본인 몸과의 어떤 관계라든지 음식과의 관계를 개선을 하려고. 그래서 자기 생각에는 사실 병원도 그냥 한 번만 오지 않은 사람들도 있듯이 어플도 마찬가지일 거다. 수능도에 있어서는 크게 차이는 없을 것 같다고 말씀을 하셨었고, 마지막으로 이 진단과 또는 이제 예후 관련해서는 당연히 그런데 조금 역할이 있을 것 같다고 하셨어요. 그래서 데이터 콜렉션을 지금 하고 계시고, 그 다음에 이제 데이터 콜렉션을 함으로써 어떤 컨텐츠를 사람들이 잘 인게이지를 하고 좋아하고 답을 하는지, 어떤 질문들은 답을 하려고 하지 않은지에 대한 이제 딱 그 분석이 나오기 때문에 그런 분석을 이제 개선을 하고, 또 이제 아까도 계속 말씀하셨지만 언어를 굉장히 순화하려고 하신다고 해요. 너무 이렇게 질문이 공격적이거나 아니면 직설적이지 않게 환자들이 조금 마음 편하게 읽을 수 있는 언어적인 거를 많이 노력한다고 하셨습니다. 그래서 당연히 진단과 예후에도 좋은 목적으로 사용할 수 있을 것 같다 마무리했습니다.
그 섭식장애는 사실 탈락률이 되게 높잖아요. 드랍아웃이. 치료 중에서도 조금 받다가 나가는 분들이 되게 많고, 특히 디지털 헬스 케어 툴도 마찬가지예요. 그래서 굉장히 낮게 잡고 기대치를 되게 낮게 잡고 시작해야 되는데, 뭐 제마 교수님께서 높다고 하시는 걸 보니, 그러니까 정말 섭식장애 환자들이 많이 이제 드랍아웃 되는 경우는 식사 치료 같은 거 할 때는 많이 드랍아웃 되거든요. 근데 이렇게 챗봇으로 대화 나누는 거는 조금 더 이렇게 높게, 수능도 높게 진행할 수 있는 것 같습니다.
Just there, so Jeannie, what she added was, as we all know, eating disorder treatment has a very high dropout rate, especially when it comes to food treatment. A lot of patients refuse to show up. So it was quite surprising and promising to hear that, the engagement rates and the compliance for the chat boxes were quite high.
yeah, I think maybe a bit less stressful. You could do it at home when you want. There's not someone there pressuring you. So I think it's a nice sort of stepping stone maybe to more formal treatment.
아무래도 이제 온라인으로 이렇게 어플하다 보면 강압적이지 않는 분위기에서 본인이 하고 싶을 때 할 수 있으니까 순도가 높은 것 같지 않겠느냐라고 코멘트 마무리해 주셨습니다.
마무리를 해도 될까요? 네, 마무리를 좀 하겠습니다.
So we will wrap up. Thank you for joining, Gemma, and we look forward
Thank
to
you so
seeing
much
you
for
again.
having me. It's been a terrific session. Thank you so much for all the great questions. And people are very welcome to contact me in the future and join the consortium. And congratulations, Jeannie and the team. A really fantastic event.
Yep. And we'll show you the audience on the floor.
Hi, audience. Nice to see you.
All right, it must be quite late in Australia now, so we'll let you go.
All good, all good. It's much better than like US when you have to get up at 2 a.m.
Early, that's right.
Very, very grateful for Korean time. So thank you very much again for having me. It's been an absolute honor, and I hope you have a fantastic week.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
자, 마무리가 됐습니다. 여러분 아시죠? 이탈리아 세션 신청하셔야 되는 거 아시죠? 오늘 참석해 주셔서 너무 감사드리고요. 여기 굿즈 받아가셔야죠. 호주 대사관 굿즈 받아가시고 안녕히 돌아가셨으면 좋겠습니다. 감사합니다.